Senate is still in recess. However, it is my honor and privilege to recognize someone who has been a mentor to me during my 10 years in the Senate, and that is to Senator Dick Cohen. Senator, the floor is yours.
So, Mr. President and members, let me start out by saying this is a little bit strange. Obviously, not the circumstances that we normally have for retirement speeches. It's been obviously a strange and difficult year for all of us. Let me first start by just thanking the great courtesy of the President, the Majority Leader, and standing back in the phone booth, Craig Sundag, who've been more than helpful and very flattering, both in terms of leaving the Senate right now, but also in arranging this day. I've got some friends and in the gallery, many of whom folks here on the floor know. The big surprise for me was the special guest arranged by Senator Bingham was my great seatmate of how many years? Former Senator Katie Sieben. And I haven't seen Katie for a little bit, and that's very flattering to have Katie show up. Let me offer a perspective, and John Jasinski said, did I want to bet the under-over on the length of my speech? And what I can tell you is, I wanted to say this is my last lecture, but there are no lectures. You've already heard my last lecture. But some things I want to say quite seriously, having been here for so many years. This floor of the Senate is a place where I think we spend more time here during a session than we spend at our homes. More time, obviously, than we spend in our offices. And this place is a unique place. It's a very special place. I don't know if anybody does what I often do toward the end of the session, where I just glance up and just let my eyes gaze. This is not what my office would look like if I was on the 40th floor of a Minneapolis law firm, I can assure you. It's a very unique place for all of us. But I do want to offer some thoughts, lots of thank yous. If you're here for 34 years, there are a lot of thank yous. And so I want to offer some thoughts on what started out to be honest, a very difficult year, and has ended up being a very special year. As many of you know, the year started with the death of my younger brother. And one of the reasons that I could no longer continue a campaign, some very positive things, some changes professionally, some opportunities professionally, and so it's turned out, and particularly with what's happening this afternoon, a very good time to leave. And I certainly don't leave without regrets. Certainly the fact that I'll miss working with all of you. If I have a regret in that context, it's the fact that I haven't gotten to know members of the freshman class, both majority and minority, as well as I might have hoped. It's been a very impressive class, with obviously the one exception, a little bit light on women, other than Senator Lane, but otherwise a very impressive class. And so if there's a regret, that's one, very sincere regret. But I have to look back a little bit, and if you're going to allow me, if you will allow me to have, just some thoughts, that kind of run through my mind in offering a quasi-farewell. We don't know how many more times we might be back this year. Maybe if you really like the speech, you could ask me to do it every special session. Assuming that won't be the case, I can't believe my good luck in being in this place. I left high school and went away to college. I went to school in Chicago, and that was going to be as close as I was going to get. I was going to go away to school. It was either Chicago or the East Coast. And I thought when I finished school, I was going to end up in the East Coast, was my goal. It didn't quite work out. I came back. I started school. I'd been involved in serious statewide political activity during college vacation periods. I came back, got involved in local politics, and next thing you know, I got elected to the state house representing the area I grew up in, and ran as the neighborhood kid. I was 25 years old, and to bring it full circle, I now live 5 blocks from my high school. and nothing that I quite expected. And I certainly have so many people to thank for what's happened, but certainly a huge thank you, and all of us would offer these thanks, to Senate District 64, who have, the residents of 64, if you include my terms in the House, I think have voted me into office, something like, I think it's 12 or 13 times. A couple defeats along the way, or one defeat, my first re-election to the State House, some very close races, which I want to talk about in a minute in a very serious vein. But certainly the fact that the folks from 64 gave me the opportunity to represent them in this body has just been an honor I can't believe. And I think all of us would say that when we retire, before we retire. The fact that the folks in our district invested in us the opportunity to lead the state. And when you stop to think about it, it's a very unusual honor that people we don't know, we've probably met a good number of them in campaigning, but people we don't know have said, you're the person we're going to support to lead us. It's just an overwhelming piece of flattery. And certainly in that context, I know we don't on the floor talk about politics, but I have to offer a particular thanks in that regard to the fellow who, he had surgery yesterday, some hip surgery, so he couldn't be here, but the fellow John Sherman, who some of you might know, who was my campaign manager in my very tough elections. And the fact that we have people like that who give up, not their lives necessarily, but give up so much of their time and effort, who are volunteers at our level in many instances to allow us to get here. I know after one election, a very close election, John was the campaign manager with somebody else, and Bill said to me a few days before the election, he said, yeah, you'll get elected, you'll go off to the state capitol, I get to go to work the next day. And folks who don't have the expectation of getting a job or getting a career. So it's very flattering when you think of what we're allowed to do because of folks like that. And the other thing is the fact that we have an opportunity to do things here, not just simply legislate, but we have a vista that's offered to almost nobody else. And I would certainly, to newer members, a piece of condescending advice. Make sure you take advantage of the opportunities you're offered that aren't the kinds of opportunities you would get normally. I look at somebody like Senator Pappas and Sandy's work with international elected women and the kind of work she's done with that. In my case, many of you know of the pride I've taken in being appointed by President Obama to the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. And certainly with my involvement at a national level in the first Obama campaign, those folks knew about me, but I will also tell you the White House knew about the work that I had done here in terms of arts and cultural issues. And so I was apparently somebody they considered for a fairly high-powered committee. In fact, if you'll allow me, just the funniest thing ever written about me, I think. Let me see if you agree. The Political Newspaper magazine did a story after the committee was first sworn in November of 2009. We were sworn in by Vice President Biden. There was some press to it. And the thrust of the story was, what was this collection of 32 people? What were the commonalities? What were the intersections that they had? And so it starts out that it's not the ambassador to Great Britain, it's not the ambassador to France, but one of the more prestigious commissions that somebody could have been named was the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. But exactly what does this motley crew of characters have in common with each other? And I promise you the next line was, actress Sarah Jessica Parker and Minnesota State Senator Richard J. Cohen, ? Exactly. What did I possibly have in common with Sarah Jessica Parker? It's the best line ever written about me. So you have an opportunity to do some things because the kidding aside, the service on that committee, I was quite proud of. We had some unusual programs. There were a number of things that I did. In fact, it's one of the reasons I'm leaving. One of my close friends is the entree to the LA law firm I'm working with. And so we have some opportunity to do things that otherwise we don't have the opportunity to do. I have some serious things I would like to say to all of you, but like I said, 34 years, and you have to allow me some thank yous. And there's an element of where do I start? Where do you start in this place? Because we are so dependent on so many others to get us through the day, to show us the doors, to show us what to do. You know, let's start with the front desk, with Cal and Mike and Colleen and Jessica. That's the front desk. Those are the folks we see all the time. How about the rest of the folks in engrossing? The folks in Senate information, you know, Charlie Shaw, John Trombley, and Scott Magnuson, who lives and breathes the state Senate. You know, unfortunately, I can just go on and on. The chiefs of staff for both caucuses, the minority-majority staffs, Dan Wolf, Cullen Sheehan. As I mentioned, Craig has been just spectacular and just very flattering to me. DFL chiefs of staff, my good friend Tom Kakelka. John Pollard was not, a little known fact for some of you about John Pollard. I first met John when he was the LA to the Republican minority leader in the Senate. And then when Dean switched parties, John came and joined the gang of us. But John, Christine Almeida, who became a very close friend, who's present today. The folks who've done so much for us, and I talk about chiefs of staff, I'd be remiss in not mentioning somebody who became a close friend and who was, I would argue, the model, Vic Moore, who was the long-term chief of staff in the Senate and did so much for so many of us. When I talk about staff, of course, I have to talk about the folks, and there's not a person who's ever served in the Senate who would disagree that we absolutely would not survive without Senate counsel and research. My entree into politics was working for Nick Coleman, who became Senate Majority Leader, who was then the Senate Minority Leader when he ran for governor. And when Nick became Majority Leader, he's the person who actually created the modern Minnesota State Senate, a very unusual, charismatic person. But one of the things he did is he put together Senate counsel and research. And if you can imagine existing without Senate counsel and research, and again, I would love to be able to go through every single person. You know, one advantage of being chairman of the Finance Committee for all the years that I was, and Julie's going to agree with this, is you get a chance to know a large number of the staff who aren't with your particular committee, and they're all very unique and unusual people. So I can't go through the entire list. Well, unusual in the best sense of the word, Joanne and others up there. So I can't go through everybody, but I do have to mention several people who made such a difference to me. Kathy Pontius, who retired a couple of years ago. That was kind of a tip-off for myself when Kathy left. And although she's come back temporarily, Kathy was my first Senate counsel when I chaired what was then a significant division of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Joanne Zoff, who's here this afternoon, and Joanne was head of Senate Counsel and Research, and also, of course, was a predecessor to Cal, as was Pat Flavin, who I met originally through Nick. The folks, however, who did just huge amounts of work for me in the gallery, the first pair from my first go-around as Senate Finance Chairman. Chief Counsel was Peter Watson, clearly clever, the most clever person I've ever met in the Senate staff or member in the best sense of the word. And the person who served as the chief fiscal analyst for those years, Matt Mossman. And many of you know Matt from the work that Matt did during Governor Dane's administration, now working, representing the Inter-County Association, but did a spectacular job for those 8 years as the chief fiscal analyst. And I was gone for a couple of years from the chairmanship, came back, and I found myself working, and Senator Rosen, you're absolutely going to agree, you know how invaluable they are. Tom Bodern as counsel to the committee, obviously counsel to the Rules Committee, but counsel to the Finance Committee, and Eric Nauman. And Eric, unfortunately, Eric had surgery last week. He has, he did something to an ankle of his, I think in a bike accident years ago, and was scheduled for surgery, so he's actually not able to walk at this point. Otherwise, I have no doubt he would be here. Well, we know he'd be here. He'd be here making sure that the state of Minnesota survives for another couple of years. And it's just impossible to not thank those people for what they've done, and not just for myself, but what they've done for the entirety of the state of Minnesota. So having suggested, and again, that's a problem. In fact, I look at my list, I forgot. The sergeants, we have Sven and Marilyn and Nick, but how about the rest, Dick and the folks who I missed this year in this very strange session, people like John Legou, Bob Davis, who I hope is doing well, Tom Klein, the folks who move us in and out, just kind of the unsung heroes of this place that we really wouldn't be able to survive without. Certainly I couldn't, because I would have no idea how to even hang a picture in my office, much less anything else. But I have to also thank particular senators. I talked about some of my seatmates, Chuck, Katie, who was so spectacular to sit next to for those years. Ron Latz was a seatmate, and we each learned a lot from each other. To date, myself, the mother of somebody we served with, Becky Laurie, was a seatmate for a couple of years. Randy Kelly for a few years. But I have to thank some of the senators I served with. And it's not to diminish anybody in this chamber, not to diminish anybody I've served with over the years. And at one point I thought maybe I would count the number of people I've served with. It's a lot. But I do want to mention several people in particular, people who were mentors when I came in. When I first came in, Nancy Braddis grabbed me. And most people here didn't know Nancy, who passed away, I think about 10 years ago or so. As Carla would confirm, she was, to use the phrase, a force of nature, and was just spectacular to me. First woman ever elected to the Senate, independent, I believe, of a spouse passing away. From Rochester, kind of the center of, I think, the Rochester Republican Party for a number of years, came to the Senate, was spectacular to me. Somebody that many of you do know. And I don't know what, I was offered I should have mentioned, I was offered, thanks to Cal, my historic, I'm at this desk. This is the desk I sat at for about 24 years. And I was going to sit next to Chuck, but Cal mentioned that my guests would not be able to see me in that corner. So Senator Ames was very accepting and allowing me to grab his desk and revisit my old territory. And so another reason I mentioned that is the person who was a mentor and a true partner over the years was Gary's predecessor, Denny Frederickson, and was one of the spectacular senators. And this is not to speak ill of Claire Roebling, and Julie, it doesn't involve you, but I always thought it was, when we lost the majority in 2010, I wish Dennis had run again, so he would have had the opportunity to chair the Senate Finance Committee. He was truly a partner in a lot of the work I did, more so than many of the people in the DFL caucus. I think, not to speak ill of the people in the DFL caucus, Dennis was just a spectacular state senator. And when I came in, the mentors in my caucus, Alan Spear, I shared an office with Alan, and Alan's successor, once removed, is Scott Dibble, and Scott knows exactly what Alan Spear represented. I mean, a hero to so many people. If I'm not mistaken, the first or second, I think the second gay legislator elected official in the country to announce that. A history professor at the university, probably the most brilliant legislator I've ever served with. I was the vice chairman of his committee, the Judiciary Committee, so I shared an office suite with him, and he was generous in so many ways. The only problem Alan and I had is he was an American history prof, that's my background, and we would have these obscure discussions, sometimes in front of the committee. I think there was one committee where he didn't like a bill I had that I was presenting. He made some reference to Richard II, and I wasn't very happy about that, and I went up to him and countered with Henry IV. And members of the committee were just rolling their eyes when we were doing this. But Alan was truly a special senator. The other person I want to mention that probably all of you know is Bill Luther. Bill was the assistant majority leader and kind of watched out for me in many respects and taught me so much about what happens in the state Senate. But I want to mention two senators in particular who are I don't usually use the word heroes, but these were folks who just made a huge difference in my life. First with Gene Merriam. Gene was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. And if I learned about being a finance chair, both when I chaired state departments and, Mary Kiffmeyer and I have talked about this, that with this diffusion of our finance divisions, which I'm so on, when I chaired state departments, it was about 3.5, 4 times what it is today. And so it was a difficult division. And Gene was a member of the division, but it was Gene who taught me how to budget, how to understand the budget, how to work with individuals involved with the budget, how to chair a conference committee. I'm not going to give that lecture again, but that's where I learned about chairing a conference committee. Gene was a spectacular state senator. And finally, I had the chance to serve for so many years with the person who probably was the single greatest legislator of the second half of the century, and that's Roger Moe. And I wish all of you had the opportunity to serve with Roger. I know there are a few people here left, John, I'm trying to think who else served with Roger, Chuck, and David, and rest. He was a remarkable legislator. You would talk to Roger, and he and I became, not initially, but at the end toward the end of his last X number of years, we became good friends. We're still good friends. I still see Roger. And he had an ability where you would talk to him, and you thought you were his best friend, and you would do anything for him. Now, the reality was you weren't his best friend. His best friend was actually Gene Merriam, but you thought he was your best friend. And I've never been the majority leader. And so I would turn to Paul, to Tom, who've done that. Obviously, Susan as a caucus leader. It's an unusual skill set. And if I were to write a book on legislative leadership, it would be titled The Roger Moe Story. And I don't want to go on and on about Roger, but thank you, Roger. I think Roger's actually listening this afternoon, that he was just spectacular. Okay, I said there'd be a lot of thank yous. I warned you. So now I got to do the personal thank yous. and these are the tough ones. Because that's the personal staff and the people who we get close to and get to know become our friends. And okay, so I've been here a while, so I've had a lot of personal staff. But I got to thank, to be fair, not everyone, but a good number of them. And I'm going to go in chronological order. Sheila Smith's not here. She was my first committee administrator and had served as my LA for a couple of years prior to that. And I'm really proud of what these folks have done. And some of you, many of you have met Sheila in her context of her current capacity as Executive Director of the Minnesota Citizens for the Arts. And she's put together, and I can tell you from all my national arts stuff, it is known to be the single best advocacy group in the country, arts advocacy group in the country. And it's a model for other advocacy groups. And Sheila was spectacular. Around the same time with Sheila, and she had hoped to be here, couldn't be here, Amy Shannon. And not, I don't think anybody remembers Amy. All I can tell you is we, in the process, became good friends. And without question, the single funniest person who ever worked for me. And it's not that it was a difficult time personally. If it had been, she would have gotten me through it. She still is one of the single funniest people I've ever met. Angie Haig. And Angie left, Angie worked for me for about 10 years, both as the LA and the CA. Spectacular. She deserted me for 2 great kids, Evie and Theo, and she's on her way right now, or was on her way earlier today with Evie, Theo, and Peter to their cabin. And again, expressed her regrets. Jane Geldman, who worked for several years and is now a rising star in the finance department of the Federal Health and Human Services in DC. But we do have some folks here. Kim Babine is in the gallery, and many of you remember Kim. Kim is now a director at DEED, and everything I hear from anybody at DEED or involved with her, with both this administration and the previous administration is how spectacular she is. A number of you remember Josh Nye, who now is doing a great job as the executive director of the Alzheimer's Association, who was the LA for the Finance Committee for several years, and nobody more than Josh in terms of hearing from constituents about how great the office, or how responsive the office was, and it was all Josh. And as the cliche goes, last but not least, Nicole Kaplan, the second funniest person who ever worked for me, and Nicole knows that. She knows she's not as funny as Amy. But Nicole, she'll verify that. But Nicole has done not only a great job for me, but she has mentored so many new staff and been of so much help. And she's done something that we all ought to keep in mind, and that are her friendships with the majority staff. And when we were in the majority, her friendships with the minority staff. That she knows there's a distinction in this place between parties, but she's somebody who has worked so well with everybody. And I'd be remiss for not mentioning one last person, and that's the person who's kept me sane, going, living, whatever, and that's Jody. So I said this wouldn't happen. This normally doesn't happen to me. It's happened a couple times this year. You know, folks in my caucus heard me do this a little bit, which was only about 3 weeks after the death of my younger brother. So, but thank you, Jody. And she's also going to be very critical of me later today for even mentioning her name. Let me, if I might then, you've graciously sat through all the thank yous. And I just saw that Dave Oakes has taken pictures. So just another example of somebody, a long-standing Senate staffer that we don't give enough credit for. And that's why any of us could stand up for the rest of the day. And the nice thing about today, and John, I don't know how I'm doing with the over-under, but yeah, okay. But in 2012, we had just a host of retirements. And for those of you who are new members, I mean, normally the retirement day is a very moving day where everybody speaks, they speak in order of seniority. And in 12, by the time Keith Langseth got up, it was, several hours. So I figure, you know, I'll take a couple of extra minutes. Let me offer some thoughts, however, if I might, about this place, and some negatives and positives. And I'm going to tell you what I don't like about this place, and what I wish I could change about this place. And a blame is to be placed on all of us, on many of us, both parties. And that's the increased polarization of politics in this country and in this body. In my first go-around as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and prior to that, almost all of the omnibus finance bills passed with bipartisan votes. The only bill historically over the years that did not pass with such a vote was the omnibus tax bill. When we went from the minority in 12 back to the majority in 13, Katie, I don't know if you remember, you and I were talking, and Katie sat where Jerry sits. And we talked that, you know, for the last 2 years, we just voted red on everything. Now we're just voting green on everything. There really wasn't much of a difference. And I think the polarization has become difficult. And I'm not going to get into what I think to be the genesis of that in this country, but it's something that both parties have participated in. As many folks know, certainly Carrie Root has been very generous in her comments on the floor and in a chairmanship that she's done so well with relative to the legacy bill. And the fact that I was the one who helped put it together along with Larry Poggemiller and Denny. That was a bill that raised taxes, that's had a significant impact in this state, and it passed this body with 2/3 of the senators voting for it. It was 2/3 of the Democrats, roughly, and 2/3 of the Republicans. Voting against it, 1/3 of the Democrats, 1/3 of the Republicans. In fact, Tom still gives me a hard time about it because he was chairman of the Tax Committee, I was chairman of the Finance Committee, and he was one of the 1/3 of the Democrats who voted no, and still feels he cast the right vote, although I strongly disagree. And that's an example of something that major. At a much higher level, going back to years ago, I mentioned senators that really had an impact on me. I wasn't as close to her, so I can't say she had the same kind of impact, but a brilliant, brilliant senator, Linda Berglund. And Linda, of course, was the person who helped create health care. And Michelle Benson and Jim Abler are sitting here as the successors to a lot of what Linda created. But one of the things she was part of was the so-called, I think it was the Gang of Seven. I forget who the Gang of Seven were. But these were the people who put together MNCARE. And it was 4 Democrats, and they were House and Senate members. There were 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans. One of the Republicans I know absolutely was Dwayne Benson. And when Dwayne passed away last year, and how spectacular he was, Julie, Dave Senjum, and I spoke about Dwayne Benson. But they put together MNCARE, and it was clearly a bipartisan group, and the governor was Governor Carlson. That's missing. I don't know how to recreate it. I have one thought, and whoever has the guts to do this, let me know. I mentioned that I came to this place as the hometown kid, and I had the ability to get elected. I'd grown up in the area, I grew up with your son or daughter, so-and-so, and that made a difference. I also was a product of the precinct caucus system when I think it worked. I don't think it works anymore. I think what happens is too often now in politics, we speak to the echo chamber, and we don't hear the other side. We're not around the other side until we come to this body. And we can't do anything about the change in geographies or the populace within our district. But I do think the caucuses play into that. And you can't get rid of the First Amendment. People can have caucuses, but I'll just offer the contrast. On March 3rd in my district, there were 29,000 people who voted for president. Week before the caucuses, and I have one of the most active districts in terms of the precinct caucuses, 900 people. All right, not a big year. But 2 years before, a very active campaign for governor, including somebody from my district, 1,600 people. By contrast, when I came to the state Senate, there was no other contest going on in the caucuses that night. There was also a cold, sleeting rain. It was the worst weather. And my district was quite a bit smaller, given redistricting. 2,600 people came to the caucuses that night, only for the state Senate. 1,600 people 2 years ago for a very contested race for governor. The caucuses have outlived their usefulness, and they have created a situation where we speak to a smaller and smaller echo chamber. And folks might want to consider that. If you set our primaries on March 3rd and then you started the session a few days later, you'd represent the 29,000 people in my district who came to vote in the presidential primary. Or in the governor's race, when we only had 1,600 people, which might be more apples to apples, when we had 23,000 people who voted for a governor. So that really concerns me. And part of it is I think that, have I been a good legislator? I guess I hope so. If I have been, I can tell you it's because when I started running, I had to listen to different people. Nobody believes this, and I know in his first year, Matt Little just almost chastised me for mentioning this. I had some really, really tough races in my early years. I'm the first Democrat, like Matt, to represent the area that I represent, the area I grew up in. I'm the last district to have been represented by a Republican in St. Paul or Minneapolis when I came to the state Senate and replaced Ron Seeloff, a person with whom I remain friendly with to this day, and was friendly when we were protagonists in the district. And we didn't run against each other. He left the Senate. I think I was made a better legislator for having to campaign, if not for Republican votes, to at least understand how people felt. And I look at the polarization. I've talked about a partisan polarization. I look at the geographic polarization, which I think is just simply tragic, and where our caucuses have become so geographically separate. And again, I'm symptomatic of that. As I mentioned, I'm the last person to represent a district that was held by a Republican in St. Paul or Minneapolis, and that's not going to happen again, absent something highly unusual. But I tried to make sure I had some sense. I think possibly the best compliment I've ever received was one of my campaigns X number of years ago, where I met a couple of people who had moved to the district from another state, and they were interested in getting involved politically. And we talked. And what one of them told me, he called me, and he said he and this other friend were at their friend's house, and they were talking about having met me a couple weeks before. And the next door neighbor came and joined the conversation. It was probably a nice summer day. And they were talking about meeting me, and he said, you know what? I'll tell you about Dick Cohen. I would never vote for him in a million years, but he's a pretty good guy. And that's what I try to do, and I think all of us try to do it. I think it becomes more difficult, again, with some of the polarization. That's a negative. Let me offer a couple of other thoughts, and let me offer positive thoughts. And I'm not going to sit here and give you a list of stuff I've done. I take pride in a lot of major legislation that I've put together over the years. But let me tell you what I take away from this place. And that's the impact that all of us have on individuals. You know, we get the collective applause. We go to a rally and they say, here's the hero on whatever, and we get big applause. But the response we get from individuals and the impact we can have on an individual's life. In the 90s, I authored, I think 93, 95, 97, 3 omnibus child support bills that changed the entirety of child support enforcement and collection. And I became interested in the federal government at some point came into play anyways in the middle of this process. But the most significant reason for women falling into poverty was the inability to collect child support. And so I did some significant work in changing some of the child support laws. And I got a note from somebody, and I don't know how she knew that I was the author. I still have the note somewhere. But it was, Dear Senator Cohen, my father deserted us when I was 5 years old. My mother has struggled ever since. Thank you for what you've done, and thank you, because now for the first time, I can think next year of going to college. You know, when you get a response like that, you know you're doing something right and something for folks. Even something very simple. I've watched with jealousy, most recently Senator Kiffmeyer, Chuck doing it, when all of you sign letters to high school graduates. The St. Paul School District, X number of years ago, said we could not anymore get access to the list. I've talked to St. Paul senators, but we should have put some in statute where we could have, you know, they would have had no choice. Because I enjoyed writing those letters and the notes. And I got a letter back from some graduate, and she wrote, Dear Senator Cohen, thank you very much for your note on my high school graduation. You've made me feel like a very important person. And I didn't do anything. I just wrote one of these notes that we, you know, these letters we signed. But that connection made a difference to her. More recently, if I can, one story, and Senator Benson and Senator Abler are going to know about this. I was approached last year about somebody in my district, a cab driver, and somebody who had been in legal difficulty, and Senator Limmer was involved with this as well. And this person had been in legal difficulty decades before, had been convicted of, I think, simple robbery, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't armed robbery. Had served a little bit of jail time. And DHS had changed, and he'd become a cab driver. That's what he did. He never went to college. He loved driving a cab. And he loved driving people to healthcare appointments. DHS, and I forget exactly what the rule was, had changed the rule where he was no longer allowed to drive these particular healthcare patients. And this was a good part of his business. And he didn't approach me, but his cab company that he worked for knew somebody, and they eventually came to me and authored me to author a very simple piece of legislation. And again, Michelle and Jim and Warren were very helpful in the passage of the bill in the Senate. And it did become law in the process last year. And I got a call from him. And I can't tell you how much he appreciated what this legislature did for him. He was given back his ability to work a job, earn a living at something he really enjoyed doing. And something that we would never think about. What can we do to help a particular cab driver? It was a simple bill. It wasn't, an omnibus anything. But it's the thing I've really enjoyed about this place. The chance to help folks and make a difference. Not even in terms of what we do with thousands and thousands of people, whether we're increasing taxes, lowering taxes, doing some with guns, whatever it is. The chance to help people just live a more complete life. John, we're getting close. I promise. Because I do want to leave a couple messages, not for any of you here, and what you've done, what we do, what we enjoy, but a couple messages for the state of Minnesota. I've served with a lot of folks over the years, lots of folks. And I can't tell you how impressed I am. If I've served with somebody who's been a fraud or a charlatan, I'm hard-pressed to give you the name. Obviously, some legislators are better than others. But I can't tell you, actually not you, because you all know it. I would tell the state of Minnesota, this is the hardest working group of people you could imagine. Now we don't work a job in construction. We don't work a job of that sort, which is just physically demanding. But the work that this place puts in year after year, and all of you know it, when we're here through the night. We've changed the rules of conference committees, so we no longer meet through the night. I think my first major conference committee, on Sunday morning, I had to get a paper to know what day it was. This place, House and Senate, work as hard as any group of people you can find in representing the folks of this state. The other thing I would tell the folks in Minnesota is everybody I've served with are the most sincere folks I've met. What I mean by that is I can look around the floor and I can find somebody that I align myself with totally in terms of politics and ideology. And I can look at somebody else who is 180 degrees removed from what I am. But I will tell you that person who's 180 degrees removed from what I am is absolutely sincere and absolutely well-meaning in what they represent. And they might disagree with me, and I might think they have the wrong position. But I know from serving here for many years that I can tell the folks throughout this state, you are well served by the person you represent. That person is dead serious about the job that he or she is doing, and that person is dead serious about making sure that they represent their point of view. And they don't do it for reasons of self-aggrandizement or reasons that are not the best of reasons. And again, I would have a hard time trying to think, I'm not going to go through all my blue books over the years, but I would have a hard time coming up with anybody I think has not represented and legislated from that point of view of being absolutely sincere. Finally, you've given me a chance to do something else. As I mentioned, grew up in southwestern St. Paul, Highland Park, live a few blocks from my high school, which is kind of interesting. My high school friends give me a hard time about it. I grew up in Minnesota. I knew Minnesota. I started canoeing the Boundary Waters through a couple of YMCA trips when I was a kid before it was a national park. My father grew up in Winnipeg. We'd drive up to see my grandmother. We'd go through Detroit Lakes. I'd been around the state. Remember Carey's bill for Paul Bunyan land. Went to Paul Bunyan land when I was a kid, as probably all of us did who grew up in Minnesota. But I learned about Minnesota in this place. I learned what it's like to be a farmer in Minnesota. I learned about the issues of farming. I learned about the range. I learned about people who are tradespeople. I learned about the diversity of this state. And now I'm learning about the new diversity in the state. I'm learning from people like Fong He and Patricia Torres Ray, people who didn't grow up in their home district and who came here under such different and difficult circumstances. Growing up, I knew one set of immigrants, and that was it, and those were Holocaust survivors who lived in my district, and growing up with some of their kids. But I've learned about a different Minnesota by serving this body. I've learned about the geography of this state by serving this body. And that's what all of you have allowed me to do. You've allowed me to know Minnesota, to serve Minnesota, and it has been such a great honor to work with all of you, serve with all of you. I'll miss all of you. And I hope if you remember me as anything, that I guess he was a pretty good guy. Thank you. It's been a great honor. Thank you very much.
Senator Cohen, after your picture, please join me up here real quickly. You're up there. It's my honor to present.
I thought I'm presiding again.
You can do that too if you want. We'll let you do that again.
Can I just say that?
Sure.
One thing I didn't.
He hasn't said enough, folks.
Yeah. When I presided, last man, Tom asked me, was it correct this was the first time I ever presided? The line I missed, which occurred to me, is I should have said, I don't like to rush into anything, so maybe I can do it again.
Well, it's my honor to present you with this plaque. It says, Richard J. Cohen, 1987 to 2020, in recognition of your dedication and service to the people of the state of Minnesota through your accomplishments in the state Senate.
Okay. Really, I don't know if we can.
Here, do this.
Thank you.